It was a cold and unsettling morning at Everwood High, a seemingly normal school nestled in the heart of a small town. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the scent of rain that never fell, as though the weather itself had forgotten how to function. Inside the school, an eerie silence clung to the walls. The usual hum of voices, laughter, and the soft clatter of shoes in the hallway was absent. It was the first day back after a long holiday, but the usual excitement among the students had been replaced with an uneasy stillness. Principal Hughes, a man of routine, walked the empty halls with a furrowed brow. His footsteps echoed louder than they should have, each one seemingly magnified by the hollow quiet around him. He paused in front of a classroom door, noticing the strange scratch marks on the floor just outside. At first glance, they appeared to be the work of a malfunctioning janitorial cart. But upon closer inspection, the marks were too jagged, too deliberate. A chill ran down his spine as he brushed the thought aside. "It's nothing," he reassured himself, pressing on towards his office. The students who had arrived early sat in a zombie-like daze at their desks. Their faces were pale, their eyes half-lidded. It wasn't the kind of lethargy that comes from a late night, this was different. It was as if something had drained the life from them, leaving only the hollow shells of the kids they used to be. The teachers seemed just as distant, their movements slow and almost mechanical, as though they were only going through the motions. Miss Thompson, the English teacher, stood in front of her classroom, staring at the chalkboard with unblinking eyes. Her voice, when it came, was low and monotone, lacking the usual enthusiasm. "Let's begin with the reading today, class. Turn to page 74, she instructed, though none of the students seemed to move. In the back of the classroom, Chloe, a sophomore with a keen sense of unease, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Something was off, she could feel it deep in her gut. She'd been at this school for 2 years, and she had never seen the place so lifeless. Her friends, once full of energy, now barely looked up from their desks, their eyes glazed and distant. Chloe's suspicions began to grow as she glanced out the window. The playground, normally bustling with kids during the break, was eerily empty. Even the birds had stopped singing, and the wind seemed to have stilled. It was as if the world outside had been paused, locked in a moment of unnatural quiet. Her eyes darted back to the hallway, where she thought she saw a figure moving at the far end. The person was hunched over, moving in a way that seemed wrong, too jerky, too unnatural. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was simply overreacting to the stillness of the school. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. At the same time, Ethan, one of her classmates, sat in the library with his headphones on, lost in his own world. The books around him were untouched, but he hadn't noticed the strange presence lurking in the shadows behind the bookshelves. There was a figure there, its face hidden beneath a hood, its movement unnervingly slow and deliberate. It was almost as if the figure was waiting for something. The clock on the wall ticked louder now, as if it, too, had been disturbed by the unsettling atmosphere. The silence had become so deafening that even the smallest sound seemed amplified. The sound of a door creaking open from the hallway made Chloe jump. Her eyes snapped to the entrance of the classroom, where a tall figure stood, its features barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't a teacher, and it wasn't a student. The figure was wrong, its movements jerky, its body hunched in an unnatural way. The light from the hallway flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to grow and stretch across the walls. Chloe's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with the figure. She could see it now, a face, pale and gaunt, its eyes empty and dark like 2 hollow pits. Before she could react, the bell rang, signaling the start of the first class. But instead of the usual chaos, the sound of the bell only added to the silence, amplifying the sense of dread that hung in the air. Chloe's heart raced. What was happening? The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, staring into the classroom. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan in the library, who was still oblivious to the looming presence nearby. She felt an urge to warn him, but her legs wouldn't move. The fear, thick and suffocating, kept her rooted to the spot. And then, without warning, the figure began to shuffle forward, its feet dragging on the floor with a horrible scraping sound. Chloe's mind screamed for her to run, to do something, anything. But her body was frozen, paralyzed by the terror that had consumed her. It wasn't until the figure let out a low, guttural growl that Chloe realized it wasn't human. It was something far worse. It was only the beginning. To be continued. Chloe's heart thundered in her chest as the creature lurched forward, its grotesque movements becoming more pronounced with every step. The classroom, once a place of learning and comfort, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in around her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers tightening around the edge of her desk as she tried to steady herself. The figure's eyes, dark and hollow, never left her. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring every moment. Chloe's mind raced. What is it? Her thoughts were a chaotic blur. What happened to it? She glanced to her left, hoping someone, anyone, would notice the approaching horror, but her classmates were as still as statues. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the scraping sound of the creature's feet dragging across the floor. Miss Thompson stood at the front of the class, her eyes glazed, staring blankly at the chalkboard. It was as if she couldn't even see the danger in front of her. The other students remained just as unresponsive, lost in their own world of detachment. Chloe's gaze snapped back to the figure. It was almost at the front of the room now, its foul presence filling the space. Why is it walking like that? Her mind screamed for her legs to move, but they refused to obey. Suddenly, the figure stopped, just a few feet away from Chloe. Its head tilted to the side, as if considering her. Then, it let out a low growl that reverberated through her bones. Chloe could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as an icy chill ran down her spine. It was then that she realized what had been wrong with the school all along. The silence wasn't natural. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was something more. Something deeper. The whole school felt dead, hollow, like a place that had been abandoned by life itself. And the creature before her, this thing that had once been a person, was proof of that. Just as Chloe opened her mouth to scream, a sudden crash from down the hall startled her. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, and in that brief moment of distraction, Chloe's instincts kicked in. She bolted from her seat, her legs finally obeying the primal urge to flee. She didn't know where to go, only that she had to get away from whatever that thing was. She sprinted toward the door, but as her hand touched the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged within her as she twisted and pulled, but the door was sealed tight. The growl behind her grew louder, and she turned, her heart sinking as she saw the creature beginning to move toward her once more. Desperately, she turned and ran to the window. She threw it open, hoping to escape, but the ground below was far too high. There was no way she could jump down without seriously injuring herself. In the distance, she could see a group of students standing by the gates, all of them motionless, staring out at the street with vacant eyes. She gasped. The entire school was like this. The silence. The stillness. They're all infected. But how? How could something like this happen so suddenly? As Chloe turned back to the classroom, she froze in horror. The figure was no longer in the room. It had vanished. Chloe's eyes darted around, her mind racing. Where did it go? The growl echoed through the hallway again, closer now, and she knew that whatever that thing was, it was no longer the only one. The fear deepened as she realized it had to be spreading. More of them are coming. She turned to run again, but this time, the hallway was filled with figures. Students. Teachers. All of them moving in the same slow, jerky motions. Their eyes were empty. Their faces pale. And their presence was enough to make Chloe's stomach twist with dread. From the back of the group, Miss Thompson's voice rang out, not in a normal tone, but in a strange, low monotone. The bell rings, but no one answers. The halls are empty, but they are not silent. Chloe's blood ran cold as the words settled over her like a heavy fog. It was as if Miss Thompson was reciting something, a mantra that had no meaning to her, except it did mean something. It's a warning. With her mind spinning, Chloe turned on her heel and sprinted toward the nearest exit, trying to ignore the cries and whispers coming from the figures behind her. She had no idea where she was going or how she was going to get out, but she knew one thing: she had to survive. She had to find a way to make it out before the silence consumed her, too. As she pushed through the door at the end of the hallway, she found herself in the gymnasium. The echo of her footsteps rang out as she entered the large, cavernous space. The gym was dark, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw shapes moving along the walls. And then she saw it: the bleachers were filled with students, their faces twisted in horror, their eyes wide open but not seeing. It was then that Chloe realized the terrifying truth: the entire school was infected. There was no escape. No safe place left. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of life itself. And the dead were walking. To be continued. Chloe's legs trembled beneath her as she stood frozen in the doorway of the gymnasium. The faces staring back at her from the bleachers were blank, empty of recognition, empty of thought. They were students, once full of life and energy, now reduced to nothing more than hollow shells. Some of them were twitching, their bodies jerking sporadically, as if they were struggling against an unseen force. Others remained motionless, their eyes wide and unblinking, locked in a gaze that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Chloe's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She tried to move, but her body was paralyzed by the sheer horror of the scene. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. What are they? What happened to them? She had to snap out of it. If she stayed here too long, she'd be just like them, just another vacant shell wandering the halls. With her heart pounding in her chest, Chloe slowly stepped back, making sure to stay as quiet as possible. She didn't want to attract attention, but the creak of the floor beneath her boots seemed deafening in the silence of the gym. The dead eyes of the students followed her every movement, but no one made a sound. No growls, no moans, just the terrible, suffocating silence. Her mind screamed for her to run, but she needed to understand what was happening. She couldn't just flee without knowing more. Something was wrong with this school, and it wasn't just the strange silence. The figures on the bleachers were sick, but it wasn't a sickness anyone could recognize. It was something else. Turning on her heel, Chloe darted toward the back exit of the gym, hoping to find a way out. As she passed by the lockers, she froze once more. There, in the hallway that led deeper into the school, was a familiar face. Ethan, her classmate. He was standing there, his posture stiff and unnatural, but his face was one of recognition. Or so it seemed. "Ethan," she whispered, rushing toward him. "Ethan, are you okay?" He didn't respond. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. He stared at her, but it was as though he didn't see her at all. Instead, his gaze drifted over her shoulder, to the hallway behind her, as if waiting for something. "Ethan, it's me," Chloe said again, this time louder, her voice breaking. But again, he didn't react. His lips parted, but only a faint, guttural groan escaped. It wasn't a word, not really, just an awful, low sound that made Chloe's skin crawl. A sound that wasn't human. Her heart sank. No. Not Ethan too. Suddenly, the air in the hallway grew thick, oppressive. A low, ominous hum filled the space, and Chloe turned quickly, her instincts screaming at her to run. The sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, and dragging, echoed down the corridor. More of them were coming. More of the students, the teachers. And they were all moving toward her, their eyes glazed and empty, their bodies twitching and jerking as though controlled by some malevolent force. Without thinking, Chloe sprinted down the hallway, desperate to put distance between herself and the growing horde. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she rounded corners, her mind frantically searching for a way out. But the school felt like a maze, endless hallways, locked doors, and dark classrooms that seemed to swallow any hope she had left. She came to the stairwell, the stairs leading down to the school's basement, a place she had never been. The door was ajar, the dim light from below spilling into the hallway like the mouth of a dark tunnel. Her body screamed at her to keep moving, to escape, but something in her gut told her she had no choice. The basement might hold the answers she needed. Taking a deep breath, Chloe forced herself into the stairwell. The air was cold and damp, and with every step, the silence became even more oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. She could hear her own breath echoing, and the sound of her shoes on the concrete steps was unnaturally loud. The door at the bottom of the stairs creaked open, and Chloe found herself in the basement. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, twisting shadows across the cracked floor. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old sports equipment, cleaning supplies, and broken lockers. The room smelled musty and forgotten, as though no one had been down here in years. But there was something else in the air, something faint but unmistakable. A smell of decay. It was almost too subtle to catch at first, but once Chloe noticed it, she couldn't ignore it. Her eyes darted around, scanning the basement. There were no figures in sight, no zombies, no dead-eyed students. But she knew that wasn't a good thing. The silence in the basement felt suffocating, and it was as if something was down here, something watching her from the shadows. Then, she heard a sound, a low scrape, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet. Chloe's heart leaped into her throat. She wasn't alone. She backed toward the stairs, but before she could move, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the same creature she had seen earlier, only now it was joined by others. Students, teachers, people who had once been part of her life, now reduced to twisted, mindless versions of themselves. Their faces were pale, their skin stretched tight across their bones. Their eyes were empty, lifeless. One of them, a teacher she recognized from her history class, slowly advanced toward her. His mouth hung open, drool dribbling down his chin as he let out a rasping breath. "Help us," his voice was a faint whisper, but the word struck Chloe like a blow to the chest. Before she could react, the group surged forward, their eyes locking onto her with a hunger that was unmistakable. She bolted for the door, but the figures were too close now. She couldn't outrun them. Trapped. Chloe's heart pounded as she darted for the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind screamed at her to move faster, but every step felt like it was in slow motion, weighed down by the growing sense of dread that surged through her veins. The figures behind her were closing in, their footsteps growing louder with every passing second. The teacher, once a friendly face in the classroom, now a twisted mockery of humanity, groaned, his mouth opening wider, as if preparing to speak, but only an inhuman rasp escaped. The other creatures, once her classmates, were just as silent, their eyes locked on her, their movements unnervingly synchronized. Chloe didn't have time to think. She wasn't sure how long she could keep running, but the instinct to survive was overpowering. Her only hope was the stairwell, the narrow path that led back up to the main school floors. She didn't even look behind her as she pushed through the basement door, but the screech of nails against concrete and the unnatural shuffling steps were enough to tell her that they were right behind her. She reached the stairs, her legs trembling beneath her, and started to climb. Each step was a struggle, her body heavy with exhaustion. The sounds from below grew fainter, but Chloe knew she couldn't let her guard down. If she slowed even for a moment, they would catch up to her. With every footstep, her mind raced. What is happening to this school? What happened to everyone? Why is this happening now? When she reached the top, Chloe didn't stop. She pushed through the door at the top of the stairwell and found herself in the hallway, once familiar and filled with the noise of students, now silent and cold. The lockers were all closed, the windows dark, and the classrooms eerily quiet. It was as if the school had been abandoned for years. The whole place felt dead, empty and hollow. The silence was unbearable. Chloe moved cautiously down the hall, her eyes scanning every corner, every door. But there were no more creatures in sight. She didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad one. Suddenly, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks, a soft thud, followed by a faint scraping noise. The sound came from down the hall, from one of the classrooms. Chloe instinctively crouched down, pressing her back against the cold, tiled wall. What was that? She strained her ears, trying to focus, and it came again, a slow, deliberate scraping noise, as though someone, or something, was dragging itself across the floor. And then, a whisper. A voice, barely audible but unmistakable. Chloe. She froze. The voice sounded like it was calling her name. But who could it be? The voice didn't belong to anyone she recognized. It was hollow, distant, yet undeniably urgent. Chloe, come closer. Her mind was screaming for her to run, to get out of the school, but something about the voice rooted her to the spot. It wasn't just a voice, there was a pull to it, a strange, magnetic force that made her want to take a step forward. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, her feet moved on their own, drawn toward the classroom at the end of the hall. The door was cracked open, and a dim light spilled out from within. Chloe stepped closer, the scraping noise growing louder with each step. Her breath quickened, her pulse racing in her ears. The voice was louder now, calling her again and again, almost frantic. Chloe. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing the door handle. It felt cold, too cold. She wanted to open it, to see who, or what, was calling her. But the warning bells in her head were deafening. This isn't right. This isn't normal. But before she could pull away, the door swung open by itself. Inside, the room was lit only by a flickering light. The desks were overturned, books scattered across the floor, and papers fluttered around in the dim light like ghosts. But the most unsettling sight was the figure standing at the front of the room. It wasn't human. At least, not entirely. The thing was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its skin was pale, like the others, but stretched tight against its bones. Its face was devoid of any humanity, eyes black and hollow, mouth open in a grim, silent scream. Its head tilted toward her, its body swaying gently as if it was unsure whether to move or stay still. Chloe's stomach turned. She wanted to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. She couldn't look away from the creature. The way it was moving, slow, deliberate, reminded her of the other creatures, but there was something different about it. This wasn't a student. This wasn't a teacher. This was something else entirely. And it was calling her. Without warning, the creature lunged, its limbs stretching impossibly long as it moved toward her. Chloe barely had time to react before she was shoved back, slamming into the wall behind her. The creature's eyes burned into hers, and its breath was like a cold wind against her skin. Just as it reached out toward her, Chloe finally broke free from her paralysis. She screamed and pushed herself away, running down the hall as fast as her legs would carry her. The creature's call echoed behind her, but she didn't stop. She didn't dare. She had to find a way out. She had to survive. The creatures weren't the only thing lurking in the shadows of the school. There were other, more sinister things, things she couldn't even begin to understand. And they were all hunting her. Chloe's heart raced as she sprinted through the deserted hallways, the blood pounding in her ears. The creature's presence still lingered in her mind, its cold, black eyes burning into her memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was still following her, that the hunt wasn't over. She needed to find a safe place, a room to barricade herself in. Her mind was a blur, racing with questions, but there was one clear thought cutting through the chaos: she couldn't let the darkness catch up to her. The school was a labyrinth, each hallway twisting into the next, turning familiar corners into strange, ominous paths. But Chloe was beyond thinking logically. Her instincts took over, and she found herself pushing through the door to the library. It was the first place that came to mind, quiet, secluded, and with plenty of shelves for hiding. She slammed the door behind her, the sound of the lock clicking echoing in the empty space. But Chloe didn't dare to relax. She quickly surveyed the room, her eyes scanning the rows of bookshelves, the tables covered in forgotten homework, and the dusty computers that were no longer in use. The air smelled stale, like no one had been here for weeks. Still, it felt safer than out there. But the silence in the library was deafening. She could hear her breath, shallow and quick, her heart still hammering in her chest. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving her feeling lightheaded, as though the fear itself was a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Chloe moved cautiously to the back of the room, stepping quietly so she wouldn't disturb the eerie stillness. She grabbed a heavy chair and wedged it under the door handle, just to be sure that no one could get in. Then she backed away, her eyes still darting around the room, feeling the oppressive weight of isolation sink in. The library wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a tomb. Chloe slumped down against a bookshelf, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her mind refused to stop. She kept replaying the events, the faces of her classmates, people she'd known her entire life, now twisted into something alien. The school itself had transformed into a nightmare, a place where nothing was safe, not even the things that were supposed to offer comfort and security. She wasn't just running from monsters anymore. She was running from everything she thought she knew. And the truth was, Chloe had no idea what was causing all of this, or if she was the last person alive. The quiet in the library began to gnaw at her, amplifying her thoughts, pulling at her sanity. Every noise seemed too loud now, the sound of her breathing, the soft creak of the building settling. Is anyone else still alive? The idea that she might be the last person left in this entire school made her stomach twist. If she was truly alone, she couldn't survive for long. She had to find a way out, or at least figure out what was happening. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. Chloe's heart stopped. She held her breath, not daring to move. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then they stopped right outside the library door. She pressed herself into the shadowed corner, her body trembling, waiting for whatever was coming. The door handle turned. Her pulse leapt into her throat. The door creaked open, just a fraction. Chloe's eyes widened. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side hadn't come in yet, but they were right there, so close. The handle jiggled again, as if someone was trying to get in, but they weren't making much noise, barely a breath. Chloe's mind raced. She could try to make a run for it, dart through the other door at the back of the library, but that would mean leaving her hiding spot, and she couldn't do that. Not yet. The door moved again, this time just enough for a figure to slip inside. Chloe gasped quietly, her fingers digging into the floor beneath her as she held her breath, praying that the figure wouldn't spot her in the dark corner. For a moment, there was nothing but the soft shuffle of shoes against the library floor, the figure moving carefully, deliberately. Chloe could hear the rasp of breath, the sound of fingers brushing against shelves, and then, a soft laugh. A chilling, familiar laugh. Her blood ran cold. Chloe? The voice was clear, but the tone was wrong, distorted. It was like hearing her name through a broken speaker, warped and unsettling. It can't be. It can't. But it was. The figure that had stepped into the library was unmistakable, Ethan. Her classmate, her friend, yet now, he was something else. His eyes were glazed over, pupils black and unblinking, the same empty stare that all the others had. He looked exactly like he had before, except now he was off. Ethan tilted his head, slowly, as though studying her. The faintest hint of a smile curled on his lips, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was predatory. "Come out, Chloe," he whispered, stepping forward, his voice barely more than a rasp. "I'm not gonna hurt you. I just want to talk." Chloe's heart thundered in her chest. This wasn't Ethan. This was something else wearing his skin, using his voice, pretending to be him. But she couldn't move, couldn't make a sound, her whole body paralyzed in fear. "Ethan, no," she whispered shakily, though she knew it wouldn't matter. "It's not you." He paused, his eyes narrowing. The smile disappeared from his face, replaced by something darker, hungrier. "Why won't you listen to me?" he growled, his voice cracking. "Don't you want to be with everyone else? It's too late to escape now. You should join us. It's easier that way." Chloe's mind spun. She had to get out. She had to leave before Ethan, or whatever that was, came any closer. But when she moved to stand, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. The room was spinning, her body weak from the stress. She felt dizzy, and before she knew it, her legs gave way, sending her crashing to the floor. Her vision blurred. And then, the last thing she heard was Ethan's voice, not a whisper, but a scream. Chloe's eyes fluttered open, but the world around her felt wrong. Her head throbbed painfully, and her limbs felt heavy, like they weren't quite her own. The cool, sterile air of the library had been replaced with something colder, damp and oppressive. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized she was no longer on the floor of the library. She was lying on something hard, uneven, and rough, and there was no light except for the faint glow of something unfamiliar. Her breath hitched. What happened? Panic surged through her chest as she tried to push herself upright, but her arms trembled with weakness. She looked around, her eyes scanning the dim surroundings. She was in a narrow, underground room, the walls covered in layers of mold and grime. The floor was stone, cold against her skin, and faint whispers of something unsettling seemed to float through the air. The air smelled of decay, of something ancient and long forgotten. There was no trace of her surroundings from the school, no shelves, no windows. Just a dark, claustrophobic space. Where am I? She struggled to her feet, her mind still clouded with confusion, and staggered toward the far wall. Something about the air in the room felt wrong, it was thick, as though it was alive. It clung to her skin and made her lungs feel tight. The whispers that had seemed distant at first were now closer, louder, like something was watching her. A shiver ran down her spine. She reached out, pressing her hand against the cold wall, trying to steady herself. The texture was different here, smooth, almost unnatural. It wasn't stone or brick, it felt like something else. Something organic. That's when she noticed it. The faintest outlines of a door on the far side of the room. A door that hadn't been there before. The metal was old and rusted, and there was a faint glow coming from beneath it, pulsing like a heartbeat. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were urging her toward it. She didn't want to go toward that door. She knew, deep down, that it wasn't a place of safety. But the pull was undeniable, and her feet seemed to move of their own accord. I have no choice. She moved forward, her hands shaking as she reached out to the door. The handle was cold to the touch, almost too cold. She turned it slowly, the rusted hinges creaking in protest. The door groaned open, revealing a dark hallway beyond. The faint glow that had seeped from beneath it was now replaced with a dim, sickly green light, casting everything in an eerie glow. Chloe stepped through the door and into the corridor. The hallway stretched on endlessly in both directions, and her steps echoed in the silence. She had no idea where this place was, but it felt like a labyrinth, twisting and turning with no clear path forward. The walls seemed to pulse, as though they were alive, breathing along with her. What is this place? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, a soft thud, then a scrape, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps. Her blood froze. She wasn't alone. Chloe immediately ducked into a nearby alcove, pressing her back against the cold stone wall, holding her breath as she waited. Her mind raced as the footsteps grew louder, closer. She couldn't afford to be seen, not by whatever was out there. The footsteps paused, and for a moment, Chloe thought she might be safe. But then, a low, gurgling sound broke the silence, followed by a rasping breath. Something moved into view in the dim light, a figure, hunched and twisted, dragging its feet along the ground. Its body was unnaturally thin, its arms too long for its frame. It moved like a shadow, its head jerking at strange angles. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest. She knew it was one of them, the creatures that had once been her classmates, her teachers, her friends. But this one was different. There was no humanity left in its eyes. Its mouth hung open, revealing sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to twitch as it moved. It sniffed the air, its head jerking left and right as it searched for something, or someone. Chloe held her breath, not daring to move a muscle. The creature's steps grew louder as it approached the alcove. It was so close now, only a few feet away, its hollow, empty gaze scanning the dark corners of the hallway. Chloe pressed herself further into the shadows, praying it wouldn't find her. For what felt like an eternity, the creature stood still, its head tilted at an impossible angle. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it shuffled away, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. Chloe exhaled, her body trembling with fear. She waited, listening for any sign that it might return, but the hallway was silent once more. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this up. She had no idea where she was or what had happened to the rest of the school. But one thing was certain, this place was far worse than the halls of the school. And the creatures weren't the only danger lurking in the shadows. Her thoughts were interrupted again by another whisper, this one clearer than before. "Chloe, it's not too late." The voice, familiar yet alien, slithered into her mind. It was the same voice she had heard earlier, in the library. The one that had called to her, urging her forward. But this time, it felt different. There was something in it, something that made her skin crawl. Is someone else here? Before she could process the thought, a loud crash echoed from farther down the hallway. Something was moving rapidly toward her. She couldn't stay here any longer. With no plan, no clear idea of what awaited her, Chloe turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the dark corridor, her mind focused only on one thing, survival. And maybe, just maybe, finding the truth behind the silence that had taken over the school. Chloe's breath came in ragged gasps as she sprinted down the dark hallway. The echo of her footsteps sounded too loud in the quiet, each step a reminder that she was being hunted. The creature's screeches, faint at first, were growing louder, more urgent. It was close, too close. She dared not look back. The darkness seemed to close in on her, swallowing everything in its path. The walls pulsed again, alive with a sickly, rhythmic thrum, as though the school itself was somehow part of the nightmare that had overtaken it. The whispers, always in the background, now felt almost tangible, pressing in on her from all sides. She couldn't escape them, couldn't outrun them. Her legs burned, but Chloe pushed forward, desperation fueling every movement. She had no idea where she was going, but she couldn't afford to stop and think. She had to move. Another screech rang out from behind her, followed by the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the stone floor. Her heart jumped in her chest. The creature was getting closer, closing the distance. And then, a door appeared. It wasn't just any door. This one was different, etched with strange symbols, carved deep into the wood as though they had been there for centuries. The door seemed to radiate a faint, unnatural glow, illuminating the darkness around it. It was both inviting and terrifying, a beacon in the midst of chaos. Without thinking, Chloe threw herself against the door, her hands fumbling for the handle. She twisted it hard, the metal cold against her skin. The door opened with a creak, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward into an even deeper darkness. She hesitated, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing louder behind her. What choice do I have? Her mind screamed for her to run, to escape, but where could she go? The school had become a trap, and the creatures were everywhere. She ran down the staircase, the stairs creaking underfoot, the air growing colder with each step she took. The atmosphere felt thick, oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in on her. Chloe felt as though she were descending into the bowels of something ancient and forgotten, a place where the rules of the world no longer applied. At the bottom of the staircase, she found herself in a cavernous room, vast and open, filled with rows upon rows of stone columns that stretched into the darkness. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the floor was slick with something wet, something that gleamed in the dim light. In the center of the room, there was an altar. The altar was simple, just a large stone slab, ancient and cracked. It was covered with strange markings, symbols Chloe had never seen before, their meaning lost to time. But it wasn't the altar that caught her attention, it was the thing lying on it. A figure. It looked like a person, but it was wrong. Its body was covered in strange, mottled skin, stretched tight across its bones, like a living corpse. Its eyes were wide open, but they were empty, hollow, black voids that stared into nothingness. The figure was tethered to the altar by chains, the rusted metal glinting faintly in the low light. Its mouth hung open, but no sound came from it. Its limbs were twisted at unnatural angles, and its chest rose and fell with slow, shallow breaths. Chloe's stomach churned as she took a step closer, her feet moving almost of their own accord. She felt a strange pull toward the figure, an irresistible need to understand what it was, to uncover the truth behind the silence that had swallowed the school. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing the surface of the stone. The air around her seemed to hum, and for a brief moment, the room felt alive. The whispers grew louder, now clear as day, wrapping around her mind like a vice. "It's all connected," the voice whispered. "You're part of it now. All of you are." The words were incomprehensible, nonsensical, but they felt so real, so true. Chloe's head spun. Was this what had happened to the others? Had they become like this thing on the altar, trapped in this twisted, half-dead state? Was this what had taken over the school, the thing that was pulling everyone into its web of silence? Suddenly, the creature from earlier appeared at the edge of the room, its eyes locked on Chloe. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, its sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "You shouldn't have come here," it growled, its voice hoarse and jagged. "This place doesn't let go." Chloe froze, her heart racing. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. She was trapped in the very heart of whatever nightmare this school had become. What does it want with me? Her mind raced, struggling to piece together the fractured pieces of the puzzle. She knew this was the source of everything. The creatures, the silence, the whispers, it all led back to this place. And now, she was standing at the center of it, facing whatever had caused the end of the world outside. The creature took a step forward, its long claws scraping against the stone floor. "It's too late for you," it hissed. "Too late for all of you." Chloe's pulse quickened, but before she could react, she heard another sound, faint, but growing louder. The soft hum of machinery, followed by a sudden burst of light. A door on the far side of the room swung open, and a figure emerged. Chloe's eyes widened as she recognized the silhouette. It was Ethan. But it wasn't the Ethan she remembered. To be continued. Ethan stepped into the room, his figure illuminated by the harsh light that blazed from behind him. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but there was something different about him. His expression was empty, detached, as if he was no longer the person Chloe had once known. "Ethan?" Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible in the heavy air. Ethan didn't respond. He moved with a deliberate slowness, like someone caught in a trance, his gaze unfocused as he walked toward the altar. The creature from earlier, the twisted thing with the jagged teeth, seemed to recognize him. Its grotesque smile widened, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth. "He's one of us now," the creature hissed, its voice low and mocking. "You should have stayed away, Chloe. There's no escaping this. Not anymore." Chloe felt a chill spread through her chest as she watched Ethan's blank stare, his steps slow and purposeful. Something was terribly wrong with him. He was walking like a puppet, strings pulled by some unseen force, and Chloe couldn't understand why he was here, why he was moving toward the altar. She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Ethan, please. It's not you. Fight it. Fight whatever's controlling you." But Ethan didn't respond. He reached the altar and stopped, standing motionless before the lifeless figure bound to the stone slab. The whispers grew louder, echoing in Chloe's mind, feeding her doubts and fears. She could feel the pressure of the voices, pressing against her skull, like they were trying to drown her thoughts. It's too late for him. He's already lost. Chloe's hands clenched into fists as she took another step forward. She couldn't just stand there and watch. She couldn't lose Ethan like this. He was her friend. There had to be a way to save him, to break whatever hold this place had over him. She looked at the altar. The symbols were glowing faintly, the stone beneath them pulsating in time with the whispers. The air was thick with a strange energy, an unnatural force that seemed to radiate from the very ground beneath her feet. There had to be a way to stop this. There had to be a way to undo whatever had caused this twisted transformation of the school, of the people she had known. It wasn't just a place of horror, it was a living, breathing entity, feeding off the fear, the silence, the souls of those trapped within it. As if reading her thoughts, the creature turned its head slowly, fixing Chloe with an almost knowing gaze. "You think you can stop it?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. "This place is alive. It feeds on you. On all of you." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You're wrong. I'm not giving up. There's always a way out." The creature laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You still don't understand, do you? You're not meant to leave. None of you are." Chloe didn't respond. She refused to believe the creature's words. There had to be something she could do, something that could break the cycle, something that could bring an end to this nightmare once and for all. As she focused on the altar, she noticed something different. The figure lying on the stone slab wasn't just any person. It wasn't just some twisted, decayed body. There was something familiar about it. She squinted, her breath catching in her throat. No, it can't be. It was her. Chloe's heart skipped a beat as she took a step closer to the altar, her eyes widening in shock. The figure was a perfect likeness of her. The same brown hair, the same features, the same expression of horror frozen on its face. But this version of herself was pale, decayed, its body frail and unmoving, bound to the altar like a sacrificial offering. What is this place? Before she could process the revelation, the whispers reached a crescendo. The walls of the room seemed to tremble, and the ground beneath her feet shuddered. The air grew thick, oppressive, as though the very space was alive and hungry, pulling her into its grasp. Chloe felt a sudden surge of panic. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't let this place consume her like it had consumed everyone else. The creature was right, this place was alive, and it fed on fear, on despair, on silence. But Chloe wasn't going to let it win. Not without a fight. As the creature lunged toward her, its claws outstretched, Chloe made a split-second decision. She reached down and grabbed one of the rusted chains that bound the figure on the altar, pulling with all her strength. The chain creaked, the link straining, but it didn't give way. "Come on." With a final, desperate pull, the chain snapped, sending a sharp, echoing sound through the room. The figure on the altar stirred. Chloe gasped as the figure's eyes flickered open, revealing the same deep, dark emptiness she had seen in the creatures before. But there was something else, something different. It wasn't the creature's mind that had been controlling her, but something far worse. It was her. Or, rather, it was what she could have become, had she given in to this place's hold. The creature hissed in fury, its monstrous form twitching in agitation. "You can't save her, Chloe. There's no way out." But Chloe didn't listen. With a final, resolute breath, she turned to the figure on the altar, reaching out her hand to touch her own face. As she did, the room around her erupted in blinding light. The whispers ceased. And when the light faded, Chloe found herself standing alone in the empty hallway of the school, the silence now broken. The creatures were gone. The school was empty. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Chloe was free. End.